Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. I've got an unboxing for you today of something I picked up at WBC, one of two purchases that I made there. This is Storm of Steel by Decision Games. Now, I've had this game in the past, and my issue with it was that I think there's a lot to like about it, but the first edition did have some issues, which were largely remedied when they did an expansion/update kit. However, at the time I picked it up, the update kit was not really available on its own anymore, and you had to buy a quote-unquote second edition, which is the same game with the update kit. This is a Joe Miranda design. It is a strategic/operational level World War I game that has a card-driven feature that is somewhat similar to the card play that occurs in the better-known Totaler Krieg, or the original Totaler Krieg. Anyway, that gets a little more complicated. But I picked this up. I had my eye on picking up a new one, and I dumped the original, because I couldn't get the update kit. I'm like, I know I want the additional materials. A lot of what you could download. You could download the updated rulebook, but this contains some extra counters and stuff like that. And I've had my eye and have been considering picking this new edition up for a long time, and I finally just pushed the button at WBC. Like I said, it's one of two acquisitions, and the only war game that I bought there. So I finally have it. Let's give it an unboxing. And I didn't do an unboxing back in the day. Wow, there's a good amount of stuff in here. That was a shrink-wrapped bundle of stuff inside that just slammed itself around. But like I said, I've looked at the game and have fiddled with it a bit, and I think there's a lot to like about it. If you are in need of a 3-map World War I monster, I'd say not the biggest of monsters, but nevertheless a monster. So we got a couple things in here to start with. We got a bag of baggies and 2 6-sided dice, which don't match, actually. That's a bit weird, but whatever. We've got cards. There's a whole deck of cards here. It looks like there's approximately 100 of them. There is, presumably this is the update material, a player aids disc, CD-ROM. I do have an external CD-ROM player, because none of the computers I've bought in the last several years actually have an optical drive in them anymore. This has introduction, game setup folder, on the table folder, used during play folder, and additional counters. So maybe the additional counters aren't included in this. That would be unfortunate if so. Now there's a shrink-wrapped bundle of stuff, and then there are 3 maps. And does it say who did the art on the back of the box? It does not. We'll look at all this stuff. And this is in the big Decision Games flat box, which they use for some games, but not for others. These look like Joe Youst maps to me, but I might be wrong about that. Actually, it says right here, map graphics by Joe Youst. And I've always liked Joe as a map artist. There are 3 of these, and the way these break down is actually fairly interesting by itself. There's actually a 4th world map, which is a feature that we've seen in only a couple of World War I games, where you actually do have the kind of the whole world that you can put counters down on. And that obviously is intended to be its own standalone map. We also have these setup charts that tell you, where do we start here? Yeah, okay, so here we have 1915, 1916, 1918, and 1917. Where's 1914? I think these are the later scenario setup charts. And the 1914 setups will be in the scenario book, as I recall. So we basically have 3 maps here. We have a west front map, which we'll take a look at the cards as well. This is the west front map, and it contains all the way into Poland, actually. So it has all of France, except for the tip of Brittany here, which you may or may not be able to see on camera, all of Italy, all of Great Britain, which is unlikely to see action, except as a staging area for British troops and later presumably American troops. And then there's 2 other maps, and there's an interesting feature on, not sure where it is off the top of my head. So there's a Middle East map, which is this map, which contains, and the map layout's a little unusual too, which contains basically all of Asia Minor some of North Africa where some action happens, and a big chunk of the Ottoman Empire as well as Persia. The third map, on the other hand, is the East Front map, and there's actually a section of the East Front map that you are intended. So when we look at the East Front map, this is the East Front map. This corner actually sort of bridges this corner down. You can't really see it. This corner down here of the Caucasus. So you actually cut this off and set it as kind of at a weird angle down there. You've even got a lot of Finland, which is, of course, controlled by Russia at this time. So it's 3 maps, and there may be a diagram of this in the box. And as I mentioned, they're pretty attractive maps, in my opinion. Pretty big game. So let's open up the shrink wrap. And considering that there's a lot of space in the box, I'm very happy that they do shrink wrap this stuff. So this is the rule book, okay? And it's a 32 pages. Yeah, I'm right about that. 32 pages. Designed by Joe Miranda, developed by Christopher Cummins. Special thanks to Bob Medro. And there's some names in the playtesters that you should all recognize, including Doug Johnson, Don Johnson, and Mark Ruggiero. Counters by Larry Hoffman, maps by Joe Youst. I would describe the layout in the rules and scenario book as workmanlike. It's fine. There's not a lot of illustrations. It is on a reasonable weight of paper. Here you have the various unit types. Not full color, but again, I'm fine with that. Here are the cards. And, you know, like I said, you get a big deck of cards here, and I think they're one deck rather than 2 separate decks. But you don't have, I say that based on the backs. As in Axis Empires, you don't have like a hand that you're playing cards out of. You have kind of whatever cards are available, and these are going to be the Central Powers cards, and these are going to be the Entente or Allied cards. And each of them has a value in the upper right that is not an ops value. It's a number of impulses that play of the card gives you, in which you can do things. And the cards are fine. These look like standard sized cards rather than standard American sized cards, which is some Decision does in a number of newer-ish games, newer than this anyway, games. So I would not feel obliged to sleeve these cards because you will not be shuffling them. So Schlieffenplan, for example, played in summer 1914, and I think that's the date in which it is historically played. This tells you whether you're going to discard it or not. This says whether there's a prerequisite or not. So you'll see this one, it says see objective. This one says 1916, so you can't play this till 1916. And then you'll get an objective off of these sort of operations cards. The Germans capture Paris or destroy a total of 30 Entente divisional equivalents. And I think the counters are core level. Am I wrong about that? No, this has definitely got the expansion counters in it. Yeah, it does. We'll look at those in a second. Okay, so presumably this is the updated rulebook as well. If it is not, you can download that from Decision. So I don't care too much about that. It's really the counters that I wanted. I'm not going to make you endure flipping through the rule book. Air power becomes a factor during the course of the campaign. Now, here's the scenarios. And the scenarios are set up in a quite interesting way in that there is a set of scenarios for each year, 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18, and even 19. And then up through 1918, you've got sort of a campaign scenario for all 3 maps. You've got a West Front map, an East Front map, and a Med Front map. And that gives you sort of a lot of flexibility as sort of what you want to focus on here. And then in 1919, you just get the 1919 in the West. But you also get Scenario 22, the War in the East campaign game. I'm not sure what that is. That may be an expansion scenario. Use the Russian map and the Siberian part of the off-map display. And I'd have to read the special rules. But the scenario book is same paper, 16 pages. And you get in the setup, you get the specific setups for 1914, okay? And then for everything other than 1914, you look at that setup card to take a look at what's going on there. Here's a turn record track. There are seasonal turns. However, there are a varying number of impulses in each season, and the number depends on the play of the cards, right? Remember that impulse number off the cards. It's very interesting, and like I said, somewhat reminiscent of the way the card play works in Axis Empires, but definitely not identical. So we have 1914 all the way through 1919. You could play to the end of 1919 if you want. There's a second turn record track, which I guess I didn't remember I was getting. So both sides can keep track of that and or organize their reinforcements. Here you have a psychological warfare display, which takes into account propaganda, espionage, subversion, sabotage, counterintelligence. That's an interesting feature of the game. Here is the morale and merchant shipping index and the air doctrine level, which again, that takes effect or becomes impactful later on in a war. Here are the air tables, air superiority and air-to-ground attack table. Looks like on the bombardment strength table, you can force units to retreat. And if you hit the very top corner, you can eliminate an enemy unit. And that's very difficult to do without a massive bombing effort, which is probably difficult to do because it's World War I. Psychological warfare, you got a table here. I'm not going to explain the table on that. You've got a morale chart on the back. On the back of air superiority, you've got air unit operations. Very handy, actually. So these are the different types of missions that you can fly, and what is available is dependent on your air doctrine level. So how advanced that air doctrine is. And these player aids are printed on what I would describe as a medium weight cardstock. It's totally fine. And I like that they're color coded too. Here is naval combat. Many World War I games at similar scales to this have an extremely abstract naval system. There are exceptions to that, including Le Grand Guerre, from what I understand, because I'm never going to hold a copy in my actual hands, but also Balance of Powers from Compass, which I also think is a pretty strong game. Here's the land combat tables, and you can see there's kind of three different ways to do combat. It's probes, assaults, and infiltration, and that's fairly interesting. And there's an advanced after combat table, and that varies sometimes too. It can be as much as 3 hexes in optimal situations. Here's a political card, political events and friction. Mobilization cost, you get mobilization points in this game, and then you can spend those. I don't remember there being a production spiral, but it works very similarly to that, where you spend the points and you get it 3 turns later, right? Tables requiring play of a strategy card include U.S. entry and diplomacy. Here's the Kitchener table, the ultimatum table, the colonial campaign table. This is, I want to say this is this is definitely from the expansion material. These are setup cards. Which is, will speed setup enormously. These are not exact replicas of the counters, as we'll see, but these are really friggin' handy. And I'm always happy to see setup cards. I feel like it really saves a lot of time, setting stuff up. And these are all single-sided. They're all black and white, but I'd rather them be there and be in black and white than not be there. Russia 1914, out of an empire. Here we go. So here, because as you can imagine, counter density on the west front is going to be on the high side. So you do get this single-sided 8.5 by 11 expansion blowout map of the west front, so that you can use this to manage that more easily. Now, when we get to the counters, these are all on what look like the same counter stock, and the main game comes with 5 counter sheets. And then this is the expansion counter sheet, which gives you a lot of additional ships with silhouettes, which the original counters did, as we'll see. They're the original ship counters. No silhouettes. Not cool. These have silhouettes. As these are the Germans. These are what I take to be the French. Not sure who that is. This is the British. These are the Americans. I think these are the Russians. So they are core level units for the most part, core or army level units. And there are headquarters as well, and these are the headquarters. And you have a reverse side. So you got 10-3-2 over here. Here you have 23E. E means it's entrenched. So the back sides of the unit don't represent a step loss or anything more conventional. They represent the entrenched side of that unit. So we got the Germans and actually the light blue is Austria-Hungary. The interesting pink is the Ottomans. The orange is Italy. Britain and the US I identified correctly. Here are the Serbians and the Romanians, and a variety of other, I think, what look like conditional minors, including Denmark and the Netherlands and stuff like that. Here we have the Russians, more British, and a lot of French. And then on the last couple of sheets, we've got a lot of markers. A lot of markers for railheads. And on the backs of the railheads, we have rail junctions. And we've got agents for the espionage system. So there's kind of a lot of moving pieces in this, and that might be part of the reason why some folks bounced off of it. You also have Bolshevik units in their own color, which I strongly like. That way you don't have to switch counters out or deal with figuring out which Russian counters are which Russian counters. Is this an extra counter sheet too? I don't think so. Yeah, so here's the U.S. Armored Corps, French Armored Corps. Those are only going to come into play fairly late. The numbers at the top are just designations, I believe, as I recall. You have General Allied counters that are in the French color, and General Central Powers color counters that are in the German color. And then you got some fortifications as well. So the counter stock here, I think, would be considered fairly thin by today's standards, where we're all kind of used to that thicker stuff that everybody's, including Decision, seems to be using. But I don't find them, I don't find this thickness to be a problem. So I am pleased to, after an absence of some years, re-add Storm of Steel. Like I said, I feel like this is a solid game with a lot of potential that is helped to be fulfilled by the expansion kit, which is included if you buy it now from Decision. So happy to add this once again to the Ardwulf Lair library.
Massive thanks to the patrons of Ardwulf Lair, whose support and encouragement make what we do at Ardwulf Lair possible. Thank you, patrons. Links to help support the channel are in the video description, so check out the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store, where you can get snazzy Ardwulf Lair t-shirts, drinking vessels, and other cool swag. There is also an affiliate link for Noble Knight Games in the video description. If you buy stuff through that affiliate link, it helps to support the channel with Noble Knight store credit. Thank you, Noble Knight. Until next time, thanks for watching, and happy gaming.